Hello, everyone. Welcome to Future Ready Today, the #1 podcast focused on the future of work, where every day I break down the top stories shaping the future of work. I pull out the signals and the trends that you should be paying attention to so that you can be future ready today. Once a week, every Monday, I also do an in-depth interview with a top executive, a CEO, a CHRO, an author, a leading thinker, where we look at a deep dive around a particular topic related to the future of work. Now, today I have something interesting that I want to share with you. Before I get into that, of course, it is Friday, February 20th, 2026. That way you know the episodes are coming out live on that day. And as I mentioned, today I wanted to do something a little bit different. So as I was getting ready to record this episode, I was combing through a lot of the different news stories, seeing what's coming out there. And honestly, there wasn't a lot of new stuff around the future of work, around anything related to HR or careers or even business, right? Fridays are usually slow days, but I did have an interesting idea that I wanted to share with you. I mean, in all fairness, the one big business, the economy story that came out obviously today was the Supreme Court ruling for the Trump tariffs, which got struck down 6-3. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of debate and analysis on that. From my perspective, I mean, it seems like the market is up. And if you haven't been following the news, basically Trump said, and his cabinet came out and said, well, yeah, those tariffs are done, but we have other ways that we can still keep those tariffs going. So in a sense, he's saying now we have more certainty. Now there shouldn't be kind of this debate, this waiting on tariffs. We know that they were struck down, but we're still going to keep going with it. Whether you like the ruling or not, I think it does add a little bit of certainty and a little bit of clarity to the market because people know that they didn't pass, but things are also not going to remain changed. And as I am recording this, the market is almost closed for the day, and it appears everything is relatively green. So the market has digested that news, and it appears to be positive. But again, not what I wanted to focus on today. Today, I wanted to do something a little bit different. And I wanted to talk about the 5 laws of AI in the workplace. Now, this was a kind of my thinking out loud. And so one of the things that I thought I would start doing a little bit more on this podcast, and I've been doing this on my Substack, is thinking out loud and sharing ideas that I'm trying to formulate but are not quite there yet. But I at least wanted to give you kind of a peek into my thought process and how I'm trying to formulate ideas and how I'm thinking about the future. And by the way, if you're interested in that kind of content, subscribe to my newsletter. It's on Substack. You can go to futureofworknewsletter.com. There is a free version and there is a paid version for the deep dives. Now, if you're not familiar with this concept around the laws of robotics, in 1942, there was a science fiction writer named Isaac Asimov, one of my favorite. He published a short story called Runaround. And in that story, he introduced what became known as the 3 laws of robotics. And they became part of a series of books that he wrote called I, Robot. It also was turned into a major motion picture film starring Will Smith called I, Robot. Not to do a disservice to the film, but the books are much better than the movie was. And these simple rules were designed to answer a question that had haunted a lot of science fiction for decades. And that is, how do you make a machine that cannot hurt you? And so I just want to go through what these laws are, and then I want to propose my own laws, 5 laws for AI in the workplace. And again, these are not complete laws. There are holes in these laws that I will fully acknowledge, and I'll share with you what those holes are. But I think we need this kind of a structure and this kind of a foundation if we're going to be thinking about AI in the workplace. So let me first give you Isaac Asimov's laws of robotics. So the first law that he came up with: a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being come to harm. Second law: a robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And the third law is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. Now, these are elegant, they're very clean, they're very logical laws, And here's what I think made Isaac Asimov a genius, is he didn't present these laws as a solution. He spent the next 50 years of his life writing stories that showed exactly where these laws broke down. What happens when harm is ambiguous? What happens when two humans give conflicting orders to the robot? What happens when obeying the letter of the law violates its spirit? And Asimov understood something that most people still don't understand, and that is that rules applied to complex systems produce unexpected and sometimes catastrophic results. And the failure cases aren't bugs in the framework, they are the whole point of all of this. So here we are, 84 years later, and now we're talking about these laws again. And by the way, there was also one other law which I forgot to mention. It was called the zeroth law. And this law was developed much later in Isaac Asimov's career because he realized he forgot something. And the zeroth law is a robot may not harm humanity or by inaction allow humanity to come to harm. And so that was a law that he added later in time. And so again, here we are, 84 years later. We have AI systems that are making decisions about human beings in the workplace every single day. AI is a topic of conversation pretty much every day in any organization, in any media and news outlet. And it's happening at unprecedented scale, at unprecedented speed. And there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of debate, and there's a lot of questions. And these AIs, in a lot of situations, are starting to decide who's getting passed over for a job and who's not, who's getting promoted and who's not, who's getting flagged for a performance review and who is not, whose role gets eliminated and whose role does not, whose compensation is going to change and which one is going to stay the same. And so we almost have no real coherent framework for how any of it should work. There's no structure. There's no, framework like this, like these 4 laws, these 5 laws of AI in the workplace that organizations are able to follow, that these AIs are able to follow. And so today I want to change that a little bit. I wanted to propose 5 laws, 5 governing principles for how AI should operate in the workplace. And just like Isaac Asimov, I'm going to tell you where each one of these laws are vulnerable. Because a framework that can't withstand any form of pressure, I don't think is really much of a framework. It's kind of a wish list. So let's get into what these 5 laws are. And then again, I'll give you the breakdown on where the vulnerabilities are. I'll tell you how these laws kind of came up. I'll give you some data, some research behind it. And then of course, I'd be really curious to hear what you think. You can always email me, jacob@thefutureorganization.com. Which, by the way, if you're interested in sponsoring the podcast or having me speak at one of your events or just giving me feedback, that is the best email to go to. And if you like the content that I talk about on this podcast, please consider rating it or reviewing it on Apple or on Spotify. It really means a lot because putting these episodes together, having a team put them together, does take a lot of work. And so the reviews, the ratings, the emails, the comments really mean a lot, and I greatly appreciate them. So let's get right into the first law, the law of transparency. And the law of transparency is really that workers must know when AI influenced any decision that affected their job, their pay, or their career. And they have to have enough information to meaningfully be able to contest that decision if they decide to do so. Now, this sounds obvious, and it should be obvious, but it's not happening. And the gap between what should be true and what actually is true is enormous. And there have been several lawsuits that are already starting to take shape. I believe there's a lawsuit against Workday. There's a lawsuit against Eightfold AI. And I would expect that we're probably going to see more of these lawsuits start to emerge in this AI-driven world. And that is because right now an AI system could screen your resume and reject it before a single human even reads your name. An algorithm could flag your performance as being below standards based on patterns in your calendar data, your email response time, your badge swipes. An AI could calculate your likelihood of quitting and quietly remove you from the company's succession plan. And you would have absolutely no idea that any of this is happening because it's happening in this black box of AI behind the scenes. Now, in 2024 alone, and again, this is 2 years ago, AI-powered hiring tools processed over 30 million applications in the United States. 30 million people. The vast majority of those applicants had no idea that an algorithm had even touched their life. They got the form rejection email, or worse, they heard nothing at all. And here's the thing that I need you to really understand about what a lot of technologists call the black box problem, because this is where the law of transparency, I think, gets genuinely complicated and can be a little bit murky. But again, I told you this is me thinking out loud. It's not just that companies don't tell workers that when AI is involved. It's that in many cases, a lot of the organizations and the leaders, and even the employees for that matter, can't even explain what happened. AI systems can generate decisions whose reasoning their own programmers cannot even fully articulate. So in other words, the people who are building these AI tools, these platforms, these bots, these technologies, even they cannot fully explain how an AI platform is able to make a decision or come to the conclusion that it comes to. And it's not a metaphor, that's the actual state of technology today. And that's what freaks a lot of people out. So think about what that means for any kind of accountability. Now, to give you an analogy, if you're in your Tesla self-driving, for example, and it makes a certain decision. Now, of course, you don't have access to the programming, you don't understand kind of the ins and outs of it, but you do, from a conceptual level, you see what the Tesla sees while it's driving. On the screen I have full self-driving in my Tesla, and I can see exactly what it's looking at, what it's considering. Why did it slow down? Why did it think this was that? Because I see the visual, you see what the car sees. And so at least you get more insight into how it's interpreting information, how it's evaluating potential risk, speed, all those different types of things. I can see the signs that it sees. I can see if it sees a car to the left of me or to the right of me, or a person to the left of me or to the right of me. You can see all that information. With these AI tools, you have none of that. And so what you start to see is that several states have already started to push back on this. And I covered this a couple of weeks ago on this podcast. New York City, for example, they passed a law requiring employers to conduct annual bias audits of automated hiring tools. Colorado's AI Act, going into effect mid-2026, classifies employment-related AI as high risk and requires notification when those systems make adverse decisions. California, the state that I'm in, requires notice, 4 years of record keeping, and an appeal process. Illinois has similar requirements effective that started January 2026. But there's a loophole in a lot of these laws that I think people need to know about. Now, New York City's law, widely considered the most pioneering when it comes to AI, is also widely considered to be toothless. And that's because employers can claim they're exempt simply by ensuring a human played a predominant role in the final decision, even if that human did nothing more than rubber stamp what the algorithm already decided. So again, to give you, let's break that down into kind of what that means. Let's say the algorithm makes a certain decision. You should be fired. Now, the loophole around this is that you basically have a human being who's sitting behind this, and they are supposed to be reviewing the decisions that the AI makes and applying some sort of scrutiny and judgment and wisdom to the decision that AI makes. But what if a human is just sitting there with a rubber stamp? They just kind of approve whatever the AI says. So you can see in that situation that you have a human there, but they're not actually doing anything. They're just approving what the AI says. Now, technically, in that situation, you would have no recourse because you say, well, we had a human in the loop. That was part of the law. We followed the law. Human approved it. AI said it. We're done. But then again, if the human's not actually exercising judgment, wisdom, critical thinking, and they're just kind of, pushing everything through, what's the point? And so that brings me to the distinction that I want to talk about, which is there's a difference between transparency theater and actual transparency. Transparency theater is when a company tells you AI was used in this process. Full stop. Now that tells you nothing about what the AI looked at, what weight it assigned to different factors, or what you could do to potentially get a different outcome. It doesn't give you any of that insight, any of that information. Now, actual transparency is when you're told that AI flagged your application as a below average match based on keyword analysis compared to our internal benchmark. Here's what those keywords were. Here's how you can contest that assessment and request human review. Something similar actually happened in our household. So I won't mention any names or who, but let's just say someone in the family plays a lot of tennis. And they play on a tennis league. And they've been playing on this tennis league for a while, and they've been doing very well. They're going undefeated. They've had some very competitive matches. And lo and behold, one day, this person who plays tennis gets an automated email from the U.S. Tennis Association that says, you have been banned from this particular group. It was like the 3-0, which if you're in any kind of rating, 3-0 is kind of like intermediate, and then it goes 3-5, 4, 4-5, etc. And so this automated system came and sent an email and says, you're no longer eligible to play in the 3-0 group. All of the matches that you've played so far and all the hard work that you've put into playing, your last 5 games where you've gone undefeated, are now void. And so this is part of a team environment. And so all the matches that you played for your team are discarded, and you're not allowed to play in this group anymore. You've been automatically upgraded to the 3.5 group. Again, it's AI that made that decision. But the AI simply looks at the score. The AI doesn't look at training that went involved, that went into the matches. It doesn't look at how long the matches were. Just because you might beat somebody in a tennis match 6-1, 6-2, 6-3 doesn't reflect how competitive that match necessarily is. And so this AI system, this flagging, this scoring tool that the USTA uses basically says, okay, this person's been winning their matches. We don't know anything else besides that they're winning. This shouldn't be in this group anymore. And that's not necessarily a fair, and you can't contest it. You don't know why the AI made that decision. You have no recourse. That's it. And again, that's just an example in tennis. You can imagine how frustrating something like this would be in the example of workplace. And the first thing that happens when you go through this is, I need to get a lawyer. I need to contest this. I need to fight it. How do I fight it? And we're going to see more and more of those types of cases, I think, start to emerge. Now, in the 2 examples that I sent you, of course, one is the transparency theater and one is kind of the real transparency. One of them is really about checking a compliance box, and the other one actually protects you. Checking a compliance box, the whole human in the loop thing that people keep saying is really a compliance box. That's just, it's meaningless. If you have a human in the loop who approves whatever the AI says, who really cares that you have a human in the loop? You need something that actually is protecting you. Now, obviously, here's the vulnerability around that law, is that some companies are going to argue, well, we can't be fully transparent about our AI systems without exposing proprietary trade secrets. And that's not a completely frivolous objection either, because if you can publish exactly how your hiring algorithm works, obviously, different sophisticated actors out there are going to learn how to game that algorithm. But protection from gaming is, I think, a completely different question from protection from accountability. We don't allow companies to use trade secret as a blanket shield against things like employment discrimination law. And so should your AI system be able to use that as a shield? Probably not. And so the burden falls on you to build systems that you can explain or to accept the liability when you can't. And again, this is the burden that goes on you, all you companies out there who are building these technology solutions and platforms, and also for those of you who are using these different tools and platforms. So the law of transparency, know when AI touched your career, have a real path to contest it. Anything less is, I think, theater. Law number 2, the law of human primacy. A real human being with actual authority and actual accountability, must make the final decision on any choice that materially affects a worker's livelihood. Not a rubber stamp that I talked about from law number 1, not a checkbox that says manager reviewed it, but a human who is genuinely engaged with the situation, who has the authority to override the algorithm, and who is personally accountable for the outcome. And that, I think, is a key distinction. Now, here's why I think this matters beyond just the obvious. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called automation bias. And humans, when presented with an algorithmic recommendation, tend to defer to it, especially if the algorithm has a track record of being right. We trust the machine more than our own judgment, oftentimes without even realizing that we're doing it. And the problem is that automation bias means a nominal human review often isn't a real human review. A recruiter processes, let's say, 200 applications, and the AI ranks them. Now, the recruiter has time to maybe seriously consider, 20, 30 applications and actually look at them and review them. What happens to the other 170? Now, in practice, the algorithm's ranking functions as that first initial decision. The human's presence there is really just a formality. It's a legal fiction that creates the appearance of oversight without the actual substance of oversight. And it's not a theoretical concern either. In California, of course, where I'm based, a federal court here is allowing a class action lawsuit against Workday to proceed. And the claim is that Workday's AI screening tools discriminated against one applicant based on race, age, and disability status. And that discrimination played out across more than 100 different employers who all used the same screening tool. One algorithm, one set of alleged biases baked in at training, and 100 companies unknowingly applying the same discriminatory filter, again, allegedly, to the same person. And that's what happens when humans are nominally present, but algorithmically absent. And so here's where this law gets a little bit more philosophically complicated. And I, try to sit with the tension a little bit instead of just papering over it. I get it. And again, these are not fully 100% fleshed out ideas. I'm sort of thinking out loud here. Now, there are documented cases, of course, where AI makes more consistent decisions than humans. Of course, judicial settings or sentencing studies show that judges' sentences, they sentence more harshly on Monday mornings and just before lunch. That's usually when they're tired or when they're hungry. And so, again, type of bias you can talk about, right? If you're getting sentenced more harshly on a Monday, when you're tired, when you're hungry. And so it really begs the question, right? How are these AI systems being trained on carefully audited data? And if we strip out any of that kind of the human potential bias in there, do outcomes start to improve? And so that's a real question. And in some cases, the context is yes. But here's my argument for why the human primacy still matters, even in those cases. And that is really about accountability and dignity. If an algorithm denies your mortgage, if an algorithm denies your promotion or denies or eliminates your role, there's no one to answer for it. There's no conversation. There's no appeal to someone's judgment. No one who looked you in the eye and took responsibility for the decision that was made or for the outcome that was ultimately achieved. And that's not just a procedural problem. It's a fundamental violation of what it means to be treated as a person instead of just a piece of data input. And when organizations use AI to eliminate human judgment entirely, they're not just optimizing. I think really what they're doing is they're absolving themselves of responsibility. The algorithm decides, nobody's accountable, blame the model. And so the law of human primacy doesn't claim that humans will make better decisions. It insists that decisions affecting people's livelihoods must have a human being who's genuinely responsible for them. Not to make the algorithm irrelevant, but to make the outcome answerable. Now, the third law, the law of honest attribution. If an organization publicly claims that AI drove a workforce decision, that claim must be true. And the organization must be prepared to stand behind it with the same transparency it would to any other material business statement. So let me unpack a little bit about what this law is and what the law is not. It's not an argument about redistribution. It's not a mandate that companies have to share profits with workers. It is just an argument about being honest, corporate honesty, and about integrity of any of the claims that organizations make to their employees, their investors, and to the public. So here's what's actually happening, I think, in a lot of boardrooms, in a lot of press releases right now. Companies regularly invoke AI as a justification for a lot of the workforce decisions that they're making. We see this a lot. Companies are saying we're firing employees, we're getting rid of our workforce, we're reducing headcount, 16,000 here, 5,000 there, 500 there. Why are you doing it? Oh, well, AI, we're being so much more productive. We don't need the people anymore. And they're using that as a justification to shield themselves from a bad quarter, investor pressure to maybe hit margins, a strategic pivot that has nothing to do with technology. And they use AI as the narrative primarily because it really sounds inevitable. Well, of course AI was going to impact us. What did you think was going to happen? And things that are inevitable typically don't require any form of apology. They don't require explanation, and they don't require any form of accountability. This is what was destined to happen. It happened. We suffer the consequences from that. What do you want us to do? AI is transforming our industry, I think, is a far cleaner story than we needed to cut costs to satisfy the board. We overhired during the pandemic, and now we had to go back and trim, right? But saying AI is transforming our industry, yeah, I get it. Of course, it's transforming every industry. I understand. And the practice has actually been given a name, and it is called AI washing. And at its core, it's a form of deception, and it deceives employees about the real reason why they lost their jobs. It deceives investors about the actual state of the company's AI capabilities and transformation. And it deceives the broader market about what is genuinely happening inside a lot of these organizations out there. Now, think about the implications of that for a minute. If a public company tells its shareholders that AI is driving its workforce restructuring, and it's not actually true, that is a material misrepresentation. If a company tells its employees that their roles were eliminated because of AI, and they're obsolete because of technology, because of AI, and the real reason was a revenue shortfall, that is a lie with real consequences for real people. People who might have made different choices about their careers, their finances, their families, if they had been told the truth. And so the law of honest attribution says that if you invoke AI, then you own the claim. You've made a specific, verifiable statement about the cause of a business decision. And the statement should be subject to the same scrutiny as any other material assertion you make publicly. Now, here's where the law has, I think, a little bit more natural teeth, so to speak, without having to think about legislation. Markets punish dishonesty when it's exposed. And so talent pools respond to reputations. So if you get a bad reputation as a company that keeps saying, oh, AI, and it's, we can tell that it's not, you get a bad reputation. If it becomes known that a company is using AI as a cover story for decisions that are really being driven by financial pressure, the damage to the employer brand, recruiting ability, and employee trust is severe, and it's lasting. And so the law of honest attribution isn't primarily a regulatory argument, it's more of a market integrity argument. Now, technically, you have the right to do and say, in a lot of cases, whatever you want, but the market also has the opportunity to punish you for the things that you say. So if you say something stupid and do something stupid, it's not illegal, you have your freedom of speech, but socially, you do also you will suffer the consequences of the actions that you take, the things that you say. And right now, the information flowing out from a lot of organizations out there about AI and the workforce decisions is not honest. And I think there's a second dimension to this law that's worth naming, and that is that when AI genuinely does drive a workforce decision, when the displacement is real, the technology is real, and the claim is honest, companies with integrity handle the consequences of that honestly as well. Not because a government mandate requires it, but because it is the right thing to do. It's what standing behind your decisions looks like. If you're going to say something, stand behind it. I teach this to my kids all the time. If you're going to say something, back it up. If you have something that you want to say about one of your friends at school and you get challenged on it, back it up. You should be able to defend the decisions that you make. You should be able to defend the statements that you put out there. And so, again, if you said AI makes these roles obsolete, then if that's true, and if you have workers who are displaced through no fault of their performance by forces entirely out of their control, what you do next, I think, says everything about the character of your organization and your employees and your customers, your investors, your stakeholders, your shareholders. Everybody's watching how you're going to talk about it and how you're going to address it. Now, of course, the vulnerability here is attribution. How do you cleanly isolate AI's contribution from a dozen other simultaneous business pressures and factors that could be playing a role? Markets shift, costs rise, new competitors enter the market, strategies evolve. Proving that AI specifically drove a particular business decision rather than economic conditions or competitive dynamics is, yes, genuinely difficult. I acknowledge that. But here's how the burden of proof works. You made the claim. You issued the press release. You told your people about the transformation, not about the quarter. The moment you invoked the technology publicly, the moment you invoked AI publicly, you accepted responsibility for the accuracy of that statement. You don't get to invoke AI when it benefits your narrative and disclaim it when accountability becomes inconvenient. And so the law of honest attribution says, it means say what's true. Stand behind what you say and let the market hold you to it. It's sort of like with kids. What happened today? Oh, the dog ate my homework. Really? Show me the dog. Show me the homework. You said it. I need proof. So, in other words, if you're going to say something and you're going to commit to something, then you should be able to stand behind it. You can't backtrack. I teach this lesson to my kids all the time. If you make a statement out there and you get challenged on it, you should be able to defend it. If you tell me you don't like a friend or you tell me you do like a friend, then act like you do. Act like you don't. Put your actions, put your reputation, put yourself behind the things that you say. I think that's a very, very important law, not just for life, but also for organizations who are thinking about using AI. Law number 4, the law of true cost accounting. The full cost of AI-driven workforce decisions must be visible, not hidden in public budgets, not externalized onto taxpayers, not absorbed by communities without acknowledgement. And let me start with a number that I think doesn't get enough attention. And again, I'm still trying to formulate these ideas. I'm probably even going to disagree with some of the things that I'm saying in the coming weeks. I'm going to try to formulate this into a Substack article that'll probably be a little bit more coherent and thought out and structured. But when a company eliminates a significant portion of its workforce and those workers end up on unemployment insurance, when they end up on Medicaid, food assistance programs, or other public services, who absorbs that cost? It's the taxpayers, not the company, not the shareholders who benefited from the improved margins. It's the public who ends up having to subsidize those costs. And it's not a free market outcome. That is a type of subsidy. And so taxpayers, essentially what's happening, they're effectively underwriting the downside of a private business decision while the company captures the full upside. And so if you tell me you're going to lay off 20,000 employees because of productivity, well, you get the productivity gains, you get the productivity improvements, but now those 20,000 employees have to go on unemployment. They have to get assistance. They have to get Medicare. They have to get Medicaid, whatever the social services are going to be, that the taxpayers are then paying for. And so the gains are privatized, but the costs are socialized. And so it's a little bit of a paradox to kind of think through, and that should trouble anyone, I think, who potentially believes in fiscal accountability and responsibility, regardless of where you sit politically on this. And so let me just kind of paint a picture of a hypothetical example of what this looks like. And I'm not saying I have all the answers for this, but this is just one of the things that I've been thinking about that I haven't seen policymakers really considering yet. Now imagine a mid-sized city and one major employer in that city. 4,000 people are on the payroll. The company invests in AI, and it determines that it can operate with 2,000 people, and over 3 years reduces its workforce by half. The productivity gains go to the company. The stock price reflects the improvement efficiency, and the board is pleased. And in that same city, over the same 3 years, local businesses lose customers and they close. Property tax revenue drops. The school district has to cut programs. The unemployment system absorbs the claims. Hospitals see more uninsured patients. Social services strain under increased demand. And the ripple effect tends to run for years, sometimes for a generation. And so none of these costs appear on the company's balance sheet. All of them appear somewhere else, in public budgets, in community decline, and individual families who had to make impossible choices. And the company made the decision, and everyone else is paying for part of it. Now, I want to be specific about what the law of true cost accounting is actually asking for, because it's not asking for companies to write checks to communities. It's not a tax. It's not a mandate to fund social programs. It is an information argument. Those costs exist whether we measure them or we don't. True cost accounting simply says they should be visible. Mandatory reporting or workforce impact. Disclosure of projected effects on public assistance systems. Transparency about the community economic consequences of significant AI-driven restructuring. And so let policymakers, let the communities, let the investors, and the public see the full picture of the potential impact of what that's going to do, and then make decisions accordingly. Now, there is a concept in economics and largely in conservative thought, which is called the moral hazard. When people or organizations are insulated from the consequences of their decisions, they take more risks than they otherwise would. And right now, companies making large-scale AI-driven workforce decisions face almost none of the downside costs they generate. Those costs get pushed into public systems. And that insulation creates a moral hazard, potentially, that encourages reckless decision-making and ultimately a bigger bill for taxpayers. And there are a lot of debates that people are having around whether we should tax the gains from AI, whether if you have agents or robots, whether you tax them. And again, I don't know exactly what the solution is, but this is something that we're going to have to start having more conversations about as the weeks and the months and the years go on. And I think this is an important thing to be paying attention to. Now, again, you have to remember that this only comes into play when a company is very clearly claiming that the decisions that it's making are as a result of AI. Okay, that's a very, very important thing to remember here. It's a company that very clearly says, we let go of 10,000 people because of AI. Okay? That needs to be, that's a part of this. It's not just letting people go, specifically as a result of AI. Now, again, I mentioned the concept of the moral hazard here, but making, I think, those costs visible does not obviously solve the problem overnight. But visibility, I think, is the precondition for accountability. So if you don't have any visibility, it's very hard to be accountable for any decisions. And you can't hold anyone responsible. You can't hold anybody accountable for any kind of costs that are never measured, never reported, and never attributed. Now, of course, there's also a scale argument worth making here explicitly, and that is that when manufacturing moved overseas over previous decades, it happened slowly, and it happened slowly enough that communities had time, inadequate, painful time, but still time to adjust. AI-driven restructuring can happen in quarters, not decades. And that's what we saw with manufacturing. It was over many years, not many quarters. McKinsey estimates that between 400 million and 800 million jobs globally could be displaced by automation by 2030. Now, of course, I get these laws make certain assumptions. It's true that maybe we won't have this massive job displacement. We'll have a lot of new job creation. So I get there are a lot of assumptions. These laws are mainly just designed to be kind of a foundation to start the conversation that we can build on top of. Now, even at the low end of this McKinsey projection, we're talking about economic disruption at a speed and scale that no existing public safety net was ever designed to absorb. The faster and larger the distribution, the more critical it becomes, and the true costs are, and it becomes more critical that the true costs from that are more visible and attributed correctly. And so the vulnerability in this law, which I'll very admittedly and candidly acknowledge, is causation. Right? How do you demonstrate that AI is the cause? When multiple forces are reshaping a local economy simultaneously, technology, trade, geopolitics, new competitors, market conditions, demographic shifts, interest rates, AI's specific contribution to a community decline is genuinely hard to pull out. And that's a fair objection. I don't want to pretend that it's not. But one potential response there is that difficulty of attribution is not a justification for zero accountability. And perhaps the solution there is we try. We try to see what we can figure out. I mean, how do you really specifically just pinpoint everything to AI? I think that's going to be a very interesting and difficult challenge for a lot of organizations and business leaders and for policymakers going forward. I'm not sure I even know what the answer to that is. Now, we don't tell companies, we can't tell companies to make things up. We can't tell companies to try to prove justifications if they can't. So there's a lot of issues around this, and I fully acknowledge that. So the law of true cost accounting is that if your decision generates any potential costs, and you should try to make those costs visible, and all of them, not just the ones that potentially appear on your earnings report. And that law is, I think, the one, from all the 5 laws that I've been thinking about, that one maybe I have the most trouble with and the most hard to wrap my head around completely, because it feels to me the most nebulous of those laws. But the other ones, I think, have a little bit more concreteness to them, as does law number 5, I think. The law of reversibility. Before making any AI-driven decision that permanently affects workers' livelihoods, an organization must honestly answer one question. If this AI underperforms, can we rebuild what we are dismantling? And I think that's very fair. Now, if the answer to that is no, then you're probably not making a business decision. You're making a one-way bet with other people's careers at stake. And so let me tell you the Klarna story. You've probably heard it. It was all over the news. Sorry, there's something in my eyeball here. So the Klarna story has been everywhere, and it's, I think, the most instructive case study that we have for this law, and I want to make sure that you know the details of it. So Klarna, Swedish fintech company, buy now, pay later service. They were once valued at $46 billion. Now, a few years ago, they went all in on AI. They partnered with OpenAI, and they eliminated approximately 700 customer service positions. At their peak, they were routing 2/3 to 3/4 of all customer interactions through an AI assistant. The CEO, Sebastian, I'm going to butcher his last name, Semiatkowski. I have USSR family. I should be able to say this with no problem. Semiatkowski. There we go. Semiatkowski. He boasted publicly that AI can already do all of the jobs that we as humans do. He said he wanted Klarna to be OpenAI's favorite guinea pig. The company even cut ties with Salesforce and Workday entirely, building AI replacements for both platforms from scratch. The press celebrated it. Klarna was held up as a model, the template for the AI-first company of the future, and the initial numbers backed up that narrative. Resolution times improved, labor costs dropped, margins looked better, the board was pleased, and then quality collapsed. Customer complaints multiplied, not quietly, but very, very loudly. The AI responses were generic. They were repetitive. They were inflexible. When customers had complex problems, the kind that required judgment and context and human subtleties, the system trapped them in loops. They'd have to explain their problem to the bot. The bot would fail. They'd finally reach a human and have to explain the whole thing again. Frustration mounted, satisfaction scores dropped, and brand perception suffered. By early 2025, the company was forced to publicly admit the failure. As cost, unfortunately, seems to have been a too predominant evaluation factor, their CEO said. What you end up having is lower quality. He called it embarrassing. Klarna reversed course and began rehiring. But I think here's the part that doesn't make a lot of the headlines. and I think it's the most important part of the story for this law. The capability that Klarna dismantled doesn't simply reassemble itself when you're ready to bring it back. You can post a job listing. You can post a listing for institutional knowledge. You can offer a salary. You cannot recruit back the judgment. You cannot recruit back the tribal memory. You cannot recruit back the customer relationships, the employee relationship, the tacit expertise that 700 people took with them when they walked out the door. All of that is gone. And no amount of money would quickly be able to replace what took years and in some cases entire careers to build. Unless by some miracle you're able to bring back exactly those 700 people that you let go, put them back exactly where they were, it's not going to happen. I think the broader data confirms this isn't unique to Klarna. A Career Minds survey of 600 HR professionals from February of 2026 found that 52% of companies that reversed their AI-driven layoffs did so within 6 months. 6 months. They made irreversible workforce decisions based on AI promises that collapsed within half a year. And nearly 31% said that the total cost of their reversal exceeded the original savings. They ended up financially worse off than if they had never made that decision at all. Gary Marcus, he's a cognitive scientist and AI researcher, has a name for this kind of VARC. From the triumphant AI announcement to the quiet, sheepish rehiring, he calls it the Klarna effect. I wonder why. And his observation about it is worth sitting with. And that is that companies are underestimating what humans can do and overestimating the technological readiness of current AI, which can do large portions of a job, but not the whole thing. He makes a separate point about human junior developers that I think is even more profound and interesting. And he says that you hire junior developers not just for their current output. You hire them because the good ones grow into senior developers. And the AI tools don't grow. Even if AI perfectly replicated the work of every junior developer on your team, eliminating all of them would still be a catastrophic mistake because in 8 years, you'll have no pipeline for senior talent. You've optimized the present at the cost of the future. And again, I've mentioned that and I've talked about that many times on this podcast. So here's the deeper argument that I want to make about this law. And one I think that resonates regardless of kind of where you sit politically and where you sit on any number of issues. So there was an 18th century philosopher, Edmund Burke. He was considered the father of modern conservatism. And he argued that institutions accumulate wisdom over time that isn't always visible or measurable. And that the wisdom lives in practices, it lives in relationships, it lives in habits, it lives in norms that took years and sometimes generations to develop and to cultivate. And Burke's core warning was simple. If you tear those institutions down recklessly in pursuit of abstract efficiency gains or short-term financial targets, you will produce consequences far worse than the problems you were trying to solve. Not because change is bad, but because irreversible change based on untested assumptions is reckless, regardless of how good those assumptions sound at the time. And this is exactly what's happening with the AI-driven workforce restructuring that we're seeing right now. Companies are dismantling functions, they're dismantling roles, they're thinking of new capabilities that embodied years of institutional knowledge based on promises from technology that, in the majority of documented cases, has not yet delivered what it has promised. I mentioned this study on the podcast before. The National Bureau of Economic Research, their study found that 90% of CEOs reported that AI had zero measurable impact on their productivity. Zero. And this is despite years of investment, adoption, and reorganization. That is the Solow paradox reborn. This is a phenomenon that Robert Solow identified in 1987. And that's when he noted that computers were everywhere except in the productivity statistics. The gains are coming. History tells us they will eventually arrive. But we are in the lag period right now. We're in the gap between the promise and the proof. And companies are making irreversible decisions about human beings based on the promise, not based on the proof. They're doing it based on the potential, not based on the reality. And so the law of reversibility is not a protection for workers dressed up as some sort of a business principle. It's a genuine business principle. It's about making sure you understand what you're giving up before you give it up permanently. It's sort of like in the concept of chess. I always tell my daughter when she's practicing, pawns don't move backwards. Once you move that pawn forward 1 square or 2 squares, that's where it sits. Any weaknesses that you have created for yourself as a result of that pawn movement are going to be there for the rest of the game. Any holes that you have in your position are going to be there for the rest of the game. Anything that your opponent can do to exploit that pawn movement, whether it's a king weakness, whether it's a weak square, whether it's opening up one of your opponent's pieces, those things are going to be permanently there based on the move that you just made. Pawns are the only piece in the game of chess that cannot move backwards once you move them forward. And I think one of the things that a lot of organizations are not realizing right now is that AI, technology, is the pawn of the chess world. Once you move it forward, you're making decisions that you cannot take back. And so we need to create a new rule, a new law that has some form of reversibility where you can move it back. And I think that is important. It's about having a real plan, not just for a world where AI delivers on its promises, but having a plan for a world where AI might not deliver on its promises. And I'm going to unpack this more in an upcoming Substack. Again, futureofworknewsletter.com if you want to subscribe there. And so before you walk through that one-way door, ask whether the door can go both ways. Now, there are a lot of gaps that I have not solved yet, which I'm thinking through, and I haven't really heard policymakers talk through this yet, or anybody else for that matter. I think there are 3 big gaps that I've identified with my own laws. The first gap is around data ownership. So when workers use these AI tools at work, whether it's their communication, work pattern decisions, training data models, who owns the data? In almost every case today, the answer is that the company owns it. But it's the worker who generated it. It's their expertise, it's their judgment, it's their accumulated knowledge, their wisdom, the raw material feeding the AI constantly that is used to train and evaluate and get the AI to be better. And so the asymmetry is, I think, pretty profound. And none of the 5 laws directly address this idea of data ownership. So I acknowledge that's a gap. Second gap is for future workers. These laws are designed to protect people who have jobs right now. And they say almost nothing about the pipeline. People who will need jobs in 5, 10, 15, 20 years and who are already being affected by the decisions made today. So the junior developer example, I think, cuts deep in this situation. You can't eliminate entry-level roles and then expect to have senior talent in a decade. So you've broken the pipeline already that produces the expertise that you need. And so laws focused on current workers leave the next generation, I think, completely exposed. And I think the third gap from all of these is enforcement. Laws without consequences are really just suggestions. And so, yeah, these are 5 potential laws that we should be thinking about. And however well-reasoned or poorly reasoned you might think they are, but without any mechanism for accountability, I don't know, whistleblower protections, meaningful penalties, regulatory oversight, governance, litigation pathways, they just remain aspirational frameworks. And so the gap between, I think, the principle and the consequence is really where accountability goes to die. And so I'm naming these openly because I think the framework is supposed to evolve and supposed to change. I'm sure I will change it and evolve with it over time. The goal is not to hand you down some sort of, perfect commandments. I think it's more to start a conversation around how do we come up with what these 5 laws of AI in the workplace, what should they be? And I think the first step is knowing where the current thinking falls short. So I just want to leave you with a couple things that I think you can do with these laws, how you should think about this. So let me give you some concrete ideas depending on where you sit. If you're a worker or a job seeker, start asking the questions. You have every right to ask a prospective employer, whether AI tools are being used in the hiring decision, in the evaluation process. And I'm sure a lot of companies are going to deflect, and, I don't know, maybe this and that. Some will be surprised that you even ask them. The ones who answer clearly, I think, are the ones specifically showing you something very important about how they operate. The ones who go silent, I think, are also showing you something very important as well. If you're an HR leader, you really, and for that matter, if you're in legal or compliance, you should really be thinking about your exposure that you have before the law does this for you. I think by mid-2026, Colorado, again, is legally going to require you to classify employment AI as high risk and prove that you have human oversight and an appeal process in place. California, Illinois, New York already have requirements in effect. Don't wait for a lawsuit to cover where your systems are going to fall short. So think about where you have this exposure. If you're a CEO or a business leader, apply the reversibility test before your next AI restructuring decision. Not a bureaucratic exercise, but as a genuine strategic question. If this technology that you're thinking about deploying underdelivers, or falls short, or fails altogether, what did you have to permanently give up? And can you rebuild what you had to give up? Do you have that plan B? What is the true cost of getting this AI deployment wrong? And if you can't answer those questions honestly, then you're not ready to make that decision. And if you're anyone that is paying attention to the AI space, the future of work space, invest in AI fluency. Not because of fear, but because the gap between workers who genuinely understand these tools and everyone else, I think, is widening at an extraordinary rate. I think the people who know how to use AI, when to trust it, when to push back on it, who can challenge it, push it to the limits, how to integrate it into their own judgment, they're not going to be just the ones surviving this transition and transformation. They're going to be the ones largely leading it. And so I think Google's data puts the wage premium for truly AI fluent workers at 4.5 times their peers. And that gap is not going to close on its own. So Asimov spent 50 years, half a century, writing stories about these 3 laws of robotics. Again, 4 if you include the zeroth law. 50 years it took him. And each law is a sentence. And he took that long not because the laws were wrong, but because the real challenge was never actually the laws themselves. It was the messy, the ambiguous, the contradictory reality that the laws have to operate in. The same thing is true in our world, which is even more complicated, more ambiguous, more messy. And that's where we are. I think the 5 laws of AI in the workplace, they're not perfect, of course. They're just a starting ground, a starting point. I told you where I think they break down. I told you what I think they don't address. I told you the enforcement mechanisms don't yet exist. But here's what I do believe. And that is that the absence of any kind of a framework doesn't make us free of the underlying problem. It just means that the problem is going to continue to exacerbate and the problem will continue to operate, but it's going to exist without any kind of accountability. It means that workers are going to get rejected by algorithms they don't understand, and they have no path to contest it. It means organizations can make false claims about what's driving their workforce decisions, and nobody calls it what it is. It means that the real cost of AI-driven restructuring gets pushed to public budgets, to the community, to balance sheets where they're invisible and unattributed. It means that irreversible decisions get made with other people's livelihood based on technology that hasn't yet earned the level of trust that it should have. And the alternative is not to slow AI down, it's to build on a foundation that makes it worthy of the trust that we are placing in it. Again, the 5 laws: transparency, human primacy, honest attribution, true cost accounting, and reversibility. I'm curious to hear from you. Where did I get this wrong? What would you change? What did I miss? Are there any components, any pieces of this law that you think are completely off base? Are there any other laws that you would propose? And again, I struggled with this because you could potentially come up with 10 laws, 20 laws, 30 laws, 50 laws, and then it becomes too much. I tried to keep it originally to 3, realized I couldn't do it, tried 4, kind of settled on 5, but who knows if that's where it can stay. Now again, Isaac Asimov did not get these laws correct on his first try either. He refined them through many, many decades of honest, rigorous pressure testing. And I think that's what I'm inviting you to do as well. And so the future of work, as I've said many times before, it is not something that happens to us. It's something that we build. It's something that we create. It's something that we have agency over. And we do that through these exact types of conversations. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to think out loud, to share these ideas, to share these concepts. I'm looking at the time now, over an hour for this. I originally thought I'd be able to get this done in 30 minutes. Clearly, I talk way too much. But I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Again, if you enjoyed this episode, give me feedback, rate the podcast. If you're a chief human resource or a chief people officer, check out Future of Work Leaders, our CHRO group where we're talking about these types of issues and conversations. I'll be back on Monday. My guest is going to be the CHRO of Charter Communications, Paul Marchand. Sunday, my daughter has a big chess tournament. Wish us luck. We're going to need all the luck that we can get, but it should be a lot of fun. So have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and I will be back here on Monday. See you soon.